People, especially in the West, have been on an increasingly fervent quest to find out exactly what's in their food. But what happens when the pasture goes to the petri dish? Cultivated meat, infamously known as lab-grown meat, has been the subject of public scrutiny since the first prospect of it landing on our plates. But as pioneering startups race to bring their groundbreaking technologies to market, regulatory agencies approve commercial efforts of these products, and lawmakers band together to supposedly protect industrial and consumer interests. Various narratives swirl around the mysterious meals. Welcome to BS, a podcast where we take an in-depth look at different scientific and social phenomena and innovations, whilst tying them back to broader societal perspectives and why you should care. We're so happy you're here, and enjoy the episode.
Is it big meat?
Girl, don't say that. Even the way you said it. I already told you, I think like big agriculture, big farming, like that makes sense.
But how do we account for those who are farming things that are not meat?
I don't really feel like that matters that much.
Because I'm just like... Big
carnivore.
Corn. Exactly. You know what? I mess with that because
like big carnivore.
Big farming sounds too much like big farmer. Like they're gonna probably be in the media a lot, like recently, and like with the American literacy rate, I don't want them getting mixed up. Like but also big carnivore. It sounds a bit too friendly, like for what's going on. Like that's something you tell.
Big carnivore.
I feel like that's something that I would tell my nephew, like, oh, baby, we can't afford this drumstick anymore because of big carnivore. Like, but honestly, like, when it comes to novel things within, like, just the food world, I feel like I'm fully open. Like, I think a lot of Americans kind of restrict themselves in comparison to like other countries and cultures when it comes to the type of meat they're gonna eat. Like, I'm gonna eat chicken, I'm gonna eat cow, I'm gonna eat goat. Like, y'all doing too much on dog, but I'm not trying to, do like let me ease it in. But like, I'd very much be open to eating lab grown meat.
I definitely think I am open to eating anything, especially if it doesn't have negative health effects. Like, I think that to me is my biggest baseline. I mean, taste as well, of course, but like, yeah. I feel like there's a lot of tasty things. Like, you know what I've always wanted to try? Insects. I feel like grasshoppers would be good. Or like, sometimes I see people eat insects.
I saw this girl eat roaches quite literally
yesterday.
This is not a safe space. I saw this girl eat roaches yesterday, but I was quite literally about to say, like, that did not make me hungry. Like, that wasn't as appetizing.
Yeah. No, for me, it's when they, like, maybe, like, eat the little grasshoppers and it looks like a crunchy little treat. I don't know about eating roaches. Maybe I do have a limit. Like,
I feel like they're trying to push insects because we're running out of things to do. Like, they want everything to taste like chicken, but it just don't.
That's the real issue. Like, everything to taste like chicken, and it don't, and that's okay though. Like, that's okay. Maybe it's also because I grew up with, I guess, a quote unquote foreign cuisine that I'm used to different textures and different flavors. Yeah. So like, experiencing certain people's like resistance to trying literally anything else has definitely been interesting.
Yeah, I feel very similarly. But honestly, speaking of trying to get things to taste like chicken, let's get into lab grown meat, or all of its aliases: vat meat, cultured meat, clean meat, and cultivated meat. Seeming that we've kind of landed at cultivated meat when it comes to the actual industry and what they like to reference itself as. However, I definitely think that decision was a very specific one, especially when it comes to just media perception and trying to integrate this socially.
For sure.
Lab grown meat is just a bit...
I know. And a whole other episode could be done on etymology of words and just kind of like the perceptions, because like that meat and lab meat have very specific connotations. But then clean meat, it's like, okay, guys, like you can't just throw clean in front, like brainwashing to the max.
Goodness.
Like, baby, y'all haven't even been around long enough to know if your meat is clean.
I'm
genuinely.
trying to say, like, y'all are not in the club yet to be saying things like that.
In the
like,
club, we all fam.
I don't know if they fam yet, girl. Like, honestly, it's very much giving like the next wave of organic, and I just don't. I'm not sure if they're.
Sorry, I don't even want to get into that right now.
Like, I'm not sure if they're like on that wave yet.
But yeah, it's definitely was such an interesting topic to research for this episode. I know we both have had experiences in like research labs, and it's funny because actually like my experience is doing like tissue engineering and regenerative medicine research. In fact, I brought this up to my mentor and another person in the lab, and they literally were like, you two would actually be the ones to know about this topic since like your research kind of focuses on studying diseases and wound healing and stuff like that. So it was, first of all, cute little ego boost actually knowing what growth medium was and like knowing what a bioreactor is and like actually having a fundamental understanding of like the process. But past that, like it's actually simpler than I think a lot of people think, and I like being able to kind of bridge the gap between what is really isn't as semantic as people may think it is.
Yeah, I feel like in my experience, in working in labs, we were trying to kind of like collect and freeze like human blood cells. So it was not even like actually a difficult process as much as it is quite a lengthy one, and one that you have to be very precise, kind of how it is in labs most of the times.
But yeah, honestly, lab grown meat as a concept. We can start by saying that like ideas about cultivated meat, cultured meat, lab grown meat have been around for decades. I thought an interesting fact was that Winston Churchill actually wrote an essay in 1931 where he was like, it's kind of crazy that we grow a whole chicken. And he was saying like, we need to be getting to a point where we're growing the parts of an animal that we actually want to use, like the breast or a wing. And after that, the person that's most credited with kind of like bringing this idea to fruition and like really like advocating for it is a Dutch researcher named Willem van Elen. And he has a very interesting backstory. So he was a prisoner of war during World War II, actually. And that is when he came up with the idea of cultivated meat in the 1950s. Because obviously being a prisoner of war, he saw a lot of starvation, a lot of access, and
Probably had a lot of time to think.
No, literally. And so he returned home to the Netherlands to work tirelessly on the idea. He even partnered with an American businessman, John Vane, and they started consolidating patents, getting the idea off the ground. But the thing is, that initial pair faced a very hard time getting investors. And then William Van Elen, I think he actually passed away in 2015. So by then, like the first lab grown meat products had been out there. I felt kind of sad when I read that because it was like he kind of passed away before the product really got commercialized and brought to market. But I definitely
very common actually for innovators.
No, literally.
Like you'll see a PI who literally looks like he's on his like last leg before retirement. I'm like, baby, you may not even see this come to fruition.
I mean, I think that's kind of the sad truth about academia and research is that these things take decades sometimes. Like it's really a long life cycle, but obviously it's very rewarding when you are able to
I think
see
it's kind of beautiful
fruition.
though, like knowing that they are ready to like give their life to something that they won't actually may not actually inherently benefit from. And like as we can see now with the progression like and where we are now, that it actually still ends up coming to fruition.
For sure. No. So shout out to him, man. Sorry he was a prisoner of war, though. That does not sound like a fun experience.
My bad, dude.
So after that, there were multiple agencies that started to invest in the research in the early 2000s, like NASA. They invested in a space program so that their astronauts could get fed. The Dutch government, for some reason, was like very heavily pushing it. So shout out to them. And there were just a lot of different researchers that actually did kind of do that initial like testing to grow tissues like goldfish, turkey, frog, pig. So they were really just putting any animal cells in a petri dish and try to grow them. But I think the consensus that it wasn't until Mark Post, who is a Dutch scientist and professor at Maastricht University in the Netherlands in the School for Cardiovascular Diseases, was the first, along with his research team, to actually do a large-scale attempt to feasibly create lab-grown beef. And he started that project in 2011, and he actually presented a proof of concept to the public. And it was a burger, actually, that they literally did like a live television sampling of.
You know, a burger London. Just makes sense, actually.
It should be the first to come to market.
It's what I was expecting.
And so they had 2 food critics and researchers there. And actually, they had a pretty positive reviews. They said it tasted like and had the texture of meat. They said it could obviously be improved. Could use a little seasoning. but they said it tasted like meat. However, that initial attempt, that burger cost around 250,000 euros, or to translate $330,000, and took 2 years to produce. So at that point, we're already not, like, that cost effectiveness ratio is not where it needs to be. Also, surprising fact that I kind of want to throw in, the person that actually funded Mark Post's research to create this first ever lab grown burger was Sergey Brin, who is the co-founder of Google. So Gold, I wanted to ask you what you thought about that.
Can I say I'm not surprised?
I mean, that's fair. That's fair.
Like, honestly, especially when people start getting the amount of money that somebody like the co-founder of Google has, like, they're much more businessmen and investors than they are actually creatives and innovators. I mean, we see the whole Neuralink and Synchron thing all the time. Like, Elon Musk, who started with Tesla, now owns Neuralink, which is like a BCI company for, like, again, like brain-computer interfaces and things that are supposed to be, well, usually targeted towards disabled people and helping them have a better quality of life. And then their competitor, Synchron, is also sponsored by, I think, Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates. And it's kind of like, these are people, again, known for cars, social media, things of the sort. But at the end of the day, I just think they're businessmen and capitalists first. So this actually makes quite a lot of sense.
No, for sure. But I remember seeing that. I was like, quite interesting. Because he used to be anonymous, too. It wasn't until 2013 it got revealed that he was here. I was like, why are you hiding in the shadows like Batman?
But one thing I will say, like, if we see some genuine large investments from big names, I feel like that's a indicator that something might actually have a real chance of, like, breaking into the mainstream.
I felt that, too, a lot. You can definitely, because for me, it's about the fact that for it to even get to the point where it's reached you, and like you and your team have conceptual understanding of this, proof of concept, and actually believe that this is a feasible idea, it usually means it's $1 million idea.
Yeah, like, okay, you have some kind of legitimacy. Okay.
But yeah, ever since that initial burger got kind of like launched in 2013, it has been a rush of new competitors into the market who have been at varying levels of development. So there's already around 30 to 40 startups working in this field, doing diverse products such as beef, chicken, fish, even exotic beasts, which we can talk about later. And even animal-based products like dairies and egg whites. Monumental news came in June of 2023 when the USDA granted the first ever approval of cell-cultivated meat for 2 companies, so Good Meat and Upside Foods, and they both produce lab-grown chicken. To be clear, the approval was just for lab-grown chicken, and the companies only launched very limited amounts of the products at restaurants. So no, you cannot go to Publix or Walmart right now and get lab-grown chicken. I am so sorry. But they did at least get that USDA approval, and before that they also got kind of like FDA approval. They basically sent a no questions letter, which means they approve of the safety in the products in November and March to each company respectively. And so ever since then, it's really just been a race to see who can get to market first and at the cheapest cost.
First of all, again, like, we can already tell the name Good Meat, like, it's just so
eat
clear.
Just. It's like good meat, and then it's like eat just.
Yeah. It's so clear when somebody needs to really turn up the propaganda machine.
I mean, even like, Upside Foods, I went on their website, and the whole point is I think it's supposed to be like more upsides to our like food intake, less downsides.
I mean, they're doing what they can, you know, because again, like, this is clearly something that is not currently incredibly popular.
But yeah, you can definitely tell that the names have a specific kind of connotation that they're trying to push in the mainstream, which I'm not going to act like they're the first companies to have ever once again came in with the organic and the greenwash and the good food. Is it a bit deceptive? It's not deceptive. Like, they're not, like, their products are safe and they probably can in the future.
But are they just?
Like in the future, they probably can enhance the nutritional profile. But from what I've heard from their spokespersons, they haven't started that yet. Maybe they're currently doing research and testing into that. But I mean, it's a good case in point of like, yeah, they probably do have good benefits, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we should be believing them right off the bat. But let's get into what I know everybody is waiting for, which is the actual science behind how the hell are y'all creating meats? Like, how are y'all creating meat out of thin air? Like, I know if this happened in the 1700s, they would have had these people's heads on sticks. Okay.
Nobody mourns the wicked for real. Like.
But actually, I said this in the beginning, but creating lab-grown meat is actually far more of a simplistic process than I think many people think. So you really just need 3 key things. You need harvested animal stem cells. You can get that either from a biopsy from a living animal, a fertilized egg, or, you know, a cell storage bank that has these cells in accumulation. You just need a warm, sterile vessel. These can like exist at varying scales. So it really could be as small as a test tube or a well plate that you just keep in an incubator. It could also be a sterile bioreactor. That's usually the biggest that it's gotten. And then the last thing that you need is a growth medium. And basically a growth medium just contains a variety of nutrients like amino acids, lipids, sugars, proteins, and salts. And there's lots of different types, and they're all just dependent on the cell type that you're trying to feed. So think of it as yummy stuff for cells, basically. Okay, cells eat growth medium up. It gives them all the nutritious effects. It's very got milk from the 2000s for us, but growth medium is what you need if you want your cells to thrive. Also, it's important to distinguish the fact that these products are not vegetarian or vegan because you have those initial derivation of animal cells. So that's just something to keep in mind. And the process kind of goes that you store the cells in the vessel with the growth medium, and they double approximately every 24 hours. After that, they kind of multiply billions and trillions of times. You continue to add additional substances like protein growth factors, cell attachment surfaces, and other potential nutrients to the vessel to enable differentiation into different cell types like muscle or fat. From a Mark Post interview in like 2013, he said that it takes 7 to 8 weeks to grow a muscle fiber. I don't know if the technology has in any way advanced since then, but I don't know. Gold, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was definitely like kind of worried about that when I heard it, because I was like, time is of the essence if this ever is going to be large scale and it's actually going to like industrial like production. So yeah, 7 to 8 weeks seems like a lot, but again, like I feel like everything's kind of hush hush and not super clear about the like science behind it. So I won't completely count them out for it.
For sure. I definitely, even in my research of this, feel that the startups are definitely being a bit vague just because obviously they don't want to reveal any IP and like give their competitors literally the secret to getting to market first. So I have a feeling that time has definitely decreased. But basically you would kind of take the cells out after 4 to 5 weeks and put them in a gel between 2 anchor points so that they can have something to attach to and actually grow into a muscle fiber. And then after that, they would need 3 more weeks of maturing to actually be able to build a full muscle. If you kind of want to aid in the growth process, you can electrostimulate or even chemically stimulate them. Chemical stimulus is better only because it most mimics the natural processes in our bodies. But of course, that is a lot of energy input, so scientists are kind of going back and forth between whether that extra energy input is necessary, especially if we're trying to do this to be more sustainable as a food source. And it's also very important to distinguish that you cannot grow cuts of meat that have bone, skin, or fat because skeletal muscle cells require specific growth conditions and nutrients that are different than fat cells, and so they are grown separately. And that's why a lot of the times when people have tried the cultivated meat, they've kind of commented on how it's denser, but still kind of mimics the flavor of an actual meat cut. And you could grow those additional cells, but you would have to kind of add them in later, whether that's adipose tissue, bone marrow, cartilage, tendons, what have you. When the cells are done growing, they actually just come out as like a paste. And so the meat has to be low. Like, it's very weird. It's very Frankenstein. Like, it's just a formless paste of just cells. And then you basically have to turn it into actual meat. So it has to be texturized utilizing like heat and mechanical forces. And then that's why the only shapes they really have available currently are either nuggets or cutlet shapes. And then they also come out yellow because there's no blood or myoglobin in the system. Like, there's no, like, it's just cells. So they actually, when they made the burger, had to add like beet dye to give it its color because otherwise it would have just been yellow, which is gross. Like, I'm sorry. I'm very glad they added the dye because it would have been very
presentation really can be everything when it comes to food.
But yeah. So the nutrition profiles of this cultivated meat are the same. However, representatives from some of the startups like Upside Foods have stated that there is a potential to improve the nutrition profiles or even potentially customize them to meet consumer needs. No pun intended.
Girl, please.
Okay, so we don't like fun. Anyways, however, there's just not enough information currently available about their nutrition and health effects because this is a very new field. And so, yes, a lot of the science has been ironed out, but there are still a lot of future steps to scaling up production and truly understanding what the long-term impacts of this innovation is.
Yeah, so we definitely came a long way when it comes to lab-grown meats. And, you know, I feel like at this point, people might start thinking, you know, is the juice even worth the squeeze? Like, it seemed like you got to do kind of sort of a lot to even get so much as one McDonald's chicken nugget. But, like, I think that there are definitely areas that we can serve to benefit from this. And, you know, the companies have definitely been, like, making sure that they, you know, give something that they can serve to benefit from this, or I feel like consumers are not going to be that into it. So yeah, as we talked about like the nutritional profile, but also it's gonna help meet the demands of meat consumption, maybe no pun intended again, but you know, rich people tend to consume more meat. For example, like in China, the average person ate like 55 kilograms of meat in like 2020, while that's like 4 times the amount that the average person ate in 1970. Obviously, like accessibility and other things come to play with that, but I just think people like meat. Like, people like the way meat tastes, and you know, a lot of people who are vegetarian, vegan, one of the main reasons that they, you know, would stop eating meat. Like, I never hear them name the taste. Like, I never hear them be like, I don't know.
That would just be disingenuous.
I had that American deli chicken wing and I said no more. Like, it was never that. And another thing that people like are hoping to get from cultured meat is to potentially reduce the risk of like antibiotic resistance as well as zoonotic viruses that arise due to how poor our farming practices can be. So in terms of like antibiotic resistance, since the way that we farm animals, especially in the United States, is very close quarters, very, you know, making sure that they're trying to get the most profit possible, that just increases the risk of disease spread. So oftentimes these animals are given antibiotics to kind of reduce that. And it's quite a lot. And oftentimes these antibiotics are also ones that humans use. But the thing is, the more and more we use them, just when it comes to like microbiology, we're kind of selecting for the cells that will survive these like antibiotics. So like they start building up a resistance, which is terrible for us because like when we do get sick and the antibiotics don't work, like low key, like that's our main girl. Like, and they're using some similar antibiotics for these animals. Like, it's a very like rough estimate because it's like very hard to track, but people believe that like around half of the antibiotics we use is actually going to farming and not humans.
That's actually quite wow. Like, that kind of gagged me. I'm not gonna lie. Like 50%. Hey.
And on top of that, you know, zoonotic viruses, like things like smallpox, measles, mumps, a lot of these things like actually arose during the agricultural revolution. And, don't get me wrong, obviously that was a great thing for like some areas because it increased food security. But there was clearly also, again, a dramatic increase in infectious diseases. So that is something like lab grown meat can kind of bring that our current farming practices, because they are so like poor and money driven, cannot bring. And I feel like, always coming off the backs of COVID, that might make things very like, that might be a very like large incentive for people, especially seeing in their lifetime like what a really strong infectious disease can look like.
For sure. As people become more health conscious, I think that they'll definitely start paying a bit more, and they actually already have started paying a bit more attention to what's in their food.
Yeah.
So that with lab grown meat, it could really go either way.
Definitely. And then also, less space is required for lab grown meat because it's done in a lab. However, like, it's still done in like very large like air, like it's like a very like large box, like, but it's nowhere near the amount of like farmland that we currently use to farm animals. So like this could be very good for the environment because a lot of the farm space that we usually have and a lot of this farmland that we usually use for agriculture is acquired through cutting down a lot of trees, which is obviously not the greatest for our already concerning like CO2 emissions. And I think one that is going to be a very like main factor is that it is better for animal welfare. Like traditional animal husbandry and like the intensive farming practices that we're using now, it leads to a lot of animal suffering because they're living in crowded areas. They're also having like overly rapid growth because of the hormones that they're on. So it can lead to limb deformities, and even just don't even get me started on the slaughtering process and what we actually have to do to kill these animals. Like,
do you remember the Matrix? To give context, guys, there is a meat like specifically big carnivore like like version of the Matrix that talks about specifically like Western like animal husbandry and farming practices. And y'all, I remember that I had to go to lunch after this and chicken tenders were on the menu and there was a particularly nefarious bite of chicken that I took, and I definitely felt the bones and the tendons in there. Girl, I could barely swallow it down.
Almost heard the scream at that point.
Whole table was silent.
But yeah, like, I mean, I really like the way people have really framed it when it comes to animal welfare. Like, there's so many questions about, can they speak? Can they advocate for themselves? Can they even imagine a life that's not like this? But the thing that we know for sure is that they can suffer. Like, that is something that is like just not of the question. So like, if there is, an opportunity and an opening to like increase like animal welfare and like not be the evilest species on earth, I feel like, I'm open to us like taking it. And there are like humane farms and things like that who focus on not trying to get the like output as like the traditional like, animal farming that we currently have. However, they're kind of unsustainable for our current consumption demands because, man, they are high. Another thing is like these are more idealistic, but they do plan to try to be cost competitive. Like right now they're using fetal bovine serum, which utilizes the blood of calves. And that's quite expensive. But there's like some reasonable hope that in the future that they'll have a cost-effective plant-based alternative that will also allow them to, have to use animals less, and also to actually be able to be competitive in the meat market. And when it comes to the environmental impact, it could be quite a gray area. I would take this with a grain of salt because obviously like this is coming from people who want to sell you this, but like it requires, less land and less water use to create like cultivated meats and like cultured foods. However, it requires so much more energy. So like when it comes to the like environmental impact, you kind of got to weigh it. And I think it's like one of those things that we might not really know like how we're going to get there until we get there, because I feel like they're kind of being very theoretical about it. For example, the Good Food Institute, which is a alternative food nonprofit, hopes like the combination of clean energy and like cultivated meats will be like ideal for climate benefit. But again, whether or not that clean energy will actually be used, or this is just something that they're putting out there because there's definitely like skeptics, that's to be debated. Now, people aren't just skeptics for like no reason. Like there's definitely like reasoning behind why people feel this way about lab grown meats. Like, one, I'm just gonna be honest, like there's just a general disgust there. Like there's just a general like ill factor that is there that I feel makes people not want to dive into this. And like food neophobia, which is like the aversion to unfamiliar foods, it's partially like a survival instinct. Like novel foods, you don't like, we are very susceptible to pathogens as humans, so you don't really know exactly what you're signing up for when you try something for the first time. But it's definitely greater with meat, which also kind of tracks and makes sense like evolutionarily, because you're more likely to get an infection from eating meat.
I heard it's like the uncanny valley effect, but like for the food that you taste.
For
And so
sure.
if it's not the exact same texture, flavor profile, like if everything is not to the T, your body will almost be like, is this poison? Like, and I mean, I get that. Shout out to my ancestors, but like, what if a girl just wants to indulge in a little cultivated meat? Like,
I'm trying to say,
I don't
what
want to
if I want
gag.
to eat like a dodo bird,
Ooh, especially considering how they feel about that extinct species, they might get you, girl.
Oh, please don't come for me. But yeah, so like the unnatural aspect is definitely like playing a role, but I feel like people are open to trying. Like in a 2020 study, it showed that 93% of Chinese participants said they were likely to purchase clean meat. Just an emphasis on the fact that it said clean meat in this study. So take this study with a grain of salt, because there's clearly a bias there. And then it was around 86% for Indian participants and 75% for American participants. However, in a separate study about American adults, it showed that only 65% would try clean meat, but only 1/3 of people actually would want to use it to replace farmed meat. Like, and I feel like that is where the disconnect is, where it's just like, maybe I'd, take a little nibble here and there, but the idea of like this becoming some kind of new normal is something that I don't think people are really very interested in yet. And again, environmental sustainability issues, very gray area. Like the likelihood of people who want to like try cultivated meats, but there's a part of people who don't care.
Yeah, it's definitely that a lot of the people who would be very excited about this new development are those that are more environmentally conscious, but then it starts to beg the problem of, but what about the people that don't care? And I mean, it's a sad reality, but there are some people that don't necessarily care about the environmental impacts or even like sustainability or cruelty kind of effects of the meat industry. I know as much as we make fun of the vegetarians, the vegans, the this, that, the third, and how they're always coming at people, there is a large sector of the population that doesn't necessarily care past their own welfare.
Sure.
And so they would be, I would say, the bigger consumer block to really break through to, because a lot of the benefits that are associated with lab grown meat, they're like, I really don't care. Like,
and honestly, like that ends up being a really large issue when you think of like it policy wise, because like a lot of this fear with lab grown meats, but also people not really caring one way or the other about the like negatives of the current way we farm, is like it's translating into legal action, and people don't really see many benefits for it. And in the United States, Alabama and Florida have already banned the sale of lab grown meats. Like they didn't even let them get the foot out the door. And Iowa is prohibiting it for specifically sale to schools, and even internationally, like Italy has banned cultivated meat, and French lawmakers are close to introducing a bill for that. And, they cite the desire to protect farmers and consumers, but like, I definitely think that there's something more there. Like, Ileana, what do you feel?
You know me, I'm a skeptic at heart. Like, I'm a big optimist, but I'm also a realist. At the end of the day, I think it's important to distinguish the fact that this is for industrial profit, because it is not for consumer benefit when there is no harm to consumers occurring in the first place. Like, and I think that is the important like distinguishment in this argument, is that lab grown meat, cultivated meat, vat meat, whatever you want to call it, is just meat. Like, it is biologically meat. It is harvested from animal cells and grown, and it is meat. It is just muscle cells, sure. Like, it hasn't introduced all of the other components of meat, but it is fundamentally at its core meat. And there's even legislation to try to block them from even being able to call it meat. Like, so
I'm telling you, girl, big meat is coming. Like, or big carnivore. I don't know, but all I know is that the meat industry is a billion-dollar industry, and they're not just gonna go down without a fight. Like, even if this didn't have any barriers, guys, come on. Like come on. Like, a billion-dollar industry.
You're not gonna cut into their pockets.
I'm trying to, like, literally, they seen what's happening with the dairy industry, and they're like, it's not about to be meat. Like,
and I fell victim to it, because I definitely be buying the almond milk and the soy milk. Like,
I be seeing it in your fridge.
Oh, not too much.
Yeah, like, and even on the point of the dairy industry, like, plant-based milk went from like 6% to 15% of overall milk sales within the past decade. So like, this is something that could actually, creep up on them. So I definitely think that they're, starting to feel the pressure. And I feel like that is also a big reason why these policies are being made, and not necessarily, the welfare of the farmers and the people, Mm-hmm. And another thing is just like lack of diversity of options. Like, I like a chicken wing. I like a steak. And right now, when it comes to cultivated meat, we're at the point where it's a lot of, again, like minced or ground type of like mimicry. And it's like not really at the level where they can, again, produce you that like 16-ounce ribeye yet.
For sure. Like, and previous like food scientists have already kind of discussed the fact that mimicry and efficiency are the two biggest requirements for cultivated meat to be accepted. We've already talked about kind of like the natural human disgust at things that we can't immediately recognize. And so it's very, very, very important that we get it as close to being what people are used to as possible. But that's hard when there are thousands of different fiber strands that contribute to creating a very unique flavor and texture profile for different cuts of meat, which is why a lot of companies have already said that they're trying to invest in research for binders, fillers, and different scaffold technologies to be able to start really reconstructing like the actual kind of product of meat that people are used to. Another thing is like recreating the flow system through the meat that allows them to distribute oxygen and nutrients in the same way that our vasculature does naturally in our bodies. And that will be really important, not just for the color so that it doesn't look icky, but also so that they can start growing larger cuts of meat without having to, like, once again, not be able to have oxygen and nutrients in the middle of the body. Another detriment is scalability and cost. Although like it could potentially be cost effective, right now the largest size that they're producing at is a bioreactor of 1,200 liters, according to one of the startups, Good Foods. But in order to be able to be considered like a facility that does national distribution across the US or Western Europe, you have to be churning out a minimum of 15 million pounds per year, which means you would need bioreactors that hold at least 200,000 liters. Now, 1,200 to 200,000 is an insane scaling up in magnitude, and that requires so much energy and time to even get to that point. There's also even the question if naturally produced hormones and growth factors can even be produced at an industrial scale. And on top of that, companies also have to prove that they have to invest all of this time and energy into creating these processes, but that they can also provide the products at a competitive price in the marketplace to compete with actual meat products.
Yeah, like I definitely think like I understand skeptics when it comes to that. There's just like so many factors to consider, to the point where, at a certain time, you just kind of start questioning, like, is this the right direction to go? Like, one, I feel like I will give the cultivated meat, the lab grown meat companies some grace, because I feel like, again, like a lot of pushback towards them is just like the impact of like fear mongering, and also like people like seeing the way that the food industry has treated us beforehand, especially like when something novel has occurred, and when like a new like law has been passed.
Profit over everything.
No, actually. And I just think people are scared to be, patient zero, and then when they wake up with the fourth ear on their neck, like they're just like, dang, I should have just went to the Wingstop. And I get it, especially when it comes to like not fully understanding the science, or not like being in that field, which is honestly part of why we do the podcast, is to like just give just an ability for people to understand what's going on, and to kind of like take that barrier down. But yeah, like I feel like that is driving a lot of the conversations, and it's unfortunate because like I am a supporter of the development in science. However, like it comes to a point, like I'm hearing some, like I'm understanding some of the reasons why we're like going towards lab grown meat, and I'm just like, it just feels like another avenue to just drive our greed and our just immeasurable wants in all factors of life, where we don't want to adjust. We just want to keep going up, 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 and hope that we are building a ladder as quick as like we are going up, in hope that like, the science will just accelerate as quickly as our needs do. And I just don't think that that's like a good way to look at our consumption, that we need to keep finding, new things, novel things to deal with how much that we consume. Like we see it with food, we see it with our energy use, we see it with entertainment, and like how that's like, ruined quality of shows. We've seen it with clothes, and like acting like you can't live without fast fashion. Like, at what point do we just have to sit with ourselves in society? And especially because rich people and people who actually do have like access to excess are the ones that are, eating more and more meat. What point do we sit back and say like, we're the problem? Like, like maybe like we need to care more about animal welfare, and we need to care more about the environment, and we don't have to be the priority for everything. And maybe that the change needs to come in our behaviors before we start seeking it elsewhere.
Looking inwards is gold's advice. And no, very, very valid points. I'm so glad that you touched on just like overconsumption in every avenue of life, and how like, once again, gut reaction is to immediately run to a space where we can try to meet our consistent needs. Because like you said, like what happens when we just keep growing our needs? Like once Asia, Latin America, Africa start scaling up their meat consumption, and if we all start even operating at a fraction of what the global north is operating at, it's wraps. Okay, go ahead and tell Tara bye, because we're gone.
Man, it is wraps. Like, and again, like population is just gonna keep growing. Again, like we just keep trying to like, again, hustle our way up to act like we aren't the one that, again, is the problem. And again, it's time to, again, look inward, look at your contribution, look at our contribution as a society to our own detriment, and to the detriment of other animals, and to the environment. And again, work towards fixing that. Like, we don't have to stop trying to find novel things, but we can't keep depending on a savior. Because that's another thing about novelty, is that novelty brings uncertainty. Like, maybe like cultivated meat will end up a lot better than we like assumed it would, but in the same understanding, it could end up a lot worse. Like, there are things that people may have not even considered that might pop up as another headache to deal with, whether it be health wise, environmental wise, price wise. So we shouldn't just, again, like always just look at that shiny new toy and think, this is the one I want right now. Like there's just so many things that come with novelty, and uncertainty is just the biggest one.
For sure. For me, I just think that there are no silver bullets.
Mm-hmm.
Like there is no one-stop shop for fixing a problem. And I think that a big flaw that we as humans have is always thinking that like the minute we come up with something new, that's going to be our savior, our lifeline. There's still so many question marks as to the environmental benefits just because of the incredible use of energy. Are people even going to adopt this technology? Can we even scale it up to actually meet the needs of consumers and the amount of people that are eating meat? And I mean, it's a bit anticlimactic, as always, to end scientific discussions this way. But yes, there are question marks. And that's why we do the research. That's why we do the research for you.
Yep.
But that's why you do the research. And yeah, so just make sure to remain curious, remain a critical thinker, and really think about what's ending up on your plate and the amount that you consume. And should you even be consuming that much at all? Questions to leave you with. But yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of BS. Make sure to check out the required readings. We did a lot of hefty reading and listening in to really get to the bottom of this discussion. So always feel free to check that out in the description box. But on that note, bye.